He is
But that's
funny.
That's a combat engineer phrase. No problem so great can't be solved with the proper amount of duct tape and explosives.
Like that. All right, well, we are here at the October 18th, 2021 City Commission Study Session. And I know that we're having some technical difficulties, so I'll look at staff and see if we are, if we should just proceed or if we need to give it 5 minutes and.
Yeah, I think we do need some additional time. We're having some difficulty getting Zoom to end up on that screen.
Gotcha. Okay, so for those of you who are tuning in live and expecting to see the study session starting at 3, I think we'll be back about 3:05 or 3:10, and we will see how quickly that Dan and Jim can run through our options on sidewalk construction and repair. shorted you on time this afternoon, so I was looking ahead, and it looked like we might be able, if you're available, to finish up next week, or there are some other options in the weeks ahead. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Stack.
No problem. Thank you. We're going to talk about sidewalks today, and I don't think there'll be any major earth-shattering news, so we hope we can get through this and talk about some options and what we're thinking about for 2021 sidewalk program. It's kind of our priorities, maybe, kind of how we go about choosing or looking for what sidewalks are out there that might be needed. Kind of, I'm going to go over a little bit of the historical policy as well. Just, there's been a lot of history with sidewalks in this community, and just kind of looking at where we were and where we are at now. And then just kind of the history of sidewalks in general, just kind of a fun picture. The next slide, go to the next slide there, Jacob. Are the slides going to come up on that screen, Jacob?
Yeah.
Oh, they are, okay. All right. Want to full view that thing. There we go. I think there's a, yeah, there we go. So as you can see, sidewalks have been around forever. There's lots of different kinds out there. Surprisingly, some of our brick sidewalks are okay. There's a good example of some in Manhattan that are pretty smooth, look pretty nice. Lots of different options over the years between wood and cobblestone and pavers, and now we're pretty much all concrete sidewalks, and those have their challenges as well with settling and heaving, but it seems like they do work hopefully a little bit better than some of those old sidewalks. Next, please. Some of the problems that we've had with them, I guess, just in general, I mean, they're definitely essential to our system. We feel like some cities don't consider them that as essential, but as our complete streets plan for Salina, our comp plan, there's been times in the past where we haven't built as many sidewalks, and there's been times where we focused on them more, so you'll see that a little bit with some of the history that we talk about later. But either way, they're essential as a complete street to be a part of just not the traveling car vehicle, but also foot and bicycles and whatever, and whoever else would travel on a sidewalk. Deterioration's pretty slow. I mean, a sidewalk panel typically, if they're not being broken by some kind of equipment, or they're not being demolished by tree roots, they'll pretty much stay there for a long time, and they may settle or move a tad, but not enough to really worry about. But they do eventually have to be repaired or replaced, possibly. It's pretty low priority. Most people aren't looking to spend a lot of money on their sidewalks in front of their house. Not interested in that. It's hard enough to keep track of them and keep the responsibility of just keeping them shoveled and the weeds and grass cut next to them. So that's what most people do with them. And then when they call in, I say, my sidewalk is broken, I'd like somebody to come fix that. Well, we have to explain to them that, well, that's going to be the responsibility in the state of Kansas, is that is your responsibility. And so then usually they're not quite as interested in doing that. So then we have to see how bad the sidewalk is. But definitely limited funds, lots of things to spend our money on. This is one of them. Deferred maintenance, I guess. Some of our sidewalks are pretty old, so we have been able to get to some on some of our core areas, and that's kind of what we'll probably propose a little bit today as well. Potential hazards and liability. Next slide, please, Jacob. That potential hazard liability, that is KSA 12-1801, places that on the property owners. Now, when I looked into this a little further, it's always been a question for people is, if somebody trips and falls on a sidewalk, is that my fault, or is that going to come back on me? So that's something that our city attorneys weighed in on, and I'll just read what we found in that. Kansas case law does not support an abutting property owner having legal liability for injury to persons unless you contributed to the defect. So it's like, there's just not a lot of case law on, well, yeah, if somebody trips on a sidewalk, it's your fault. You'd have to, I guess it seems like there is some leeway there on, unless you're out, beating your sidewalk up or removing it or causing it to have problems. It's just, if you don't, otherwise, it's if we don't know about the problems. Shoveling, well, it's just, I guess that's a question, is if you've contributed to that defect. Our city code does say that we have to shovel our sidewalks, so that could be maybe one of the things there that could get you in trouble. KSA 12-1803 is a petition policy for sidewalks, which is kind of interesting that I did find in the history of Salina, we do have some sidewalks that people petition for, and then cities of the first class per that statute, it's 25 people that want to petition for a sidewalk. So in the early 90s, I saw that was on Ellsworth Street, actually, on a sidewalk for Huesner. And then if that's the case, it ends up being a assessment type of approach where they can put it in and then have the costs paid over time to their property. And it looked like at that time it was 10 years. So somebody could put a sidewalk in and then pay for it over 10 years. So it was just an interesting approach. It seems like now, most of the time, our statutes are mostly state assessment law, and our new resolution, which is really our developers and our home builders put the sidewalks in now, mostly in Salina. So the cost of the sidewalk shall be paid for by the benefited property, which in that case is the home or the house builder. Sometimes with a city-initiated project, we've built sidewalks just when we do a street improvement, such as Marymount recently, or South Ohio in the late 2000s. I mean, just any Iron Avenue. Just seems like we, as a city, have done more city-initiated projects where we just pay for all the sidewalks, and we always, typically, since the that's what that ADA. I'm trying to think. ADA, whatever that stands for. I can't think of how it's. There was a Disability Act. There we go. That was enacted in the early 90s, and then you actually had to have a transition plan in place to address that. And so the city of Salina has a pretty good plan and took on putting in ramps and putting in accessible routes to a lot of our city facilities and areas where we had quite the plan from when it's a pretty large document from the early 2000s. So we, as a city, currently we do about 40 ADA ramps a year where there aren't any, and we put those in subdivisions and on arterial streets, intersections, wherever we need them. So yeah, we're trying to get to those. Lastly, as a part of that policy, though, it's interesting that the arterial sidewalk construction in that policy says that it's supposed to be a 50-50 share with the adjacent property owner. So that is policy. It's not something that looks like since I've been here, since probably the mid-2000s, we haven't really assessed many sidewalks that I can find, other than if you build a new subdivision. So if you go to the next slide. If you go back before that, then we did have quite a few arterial assessment sidewalk projects. To talk more about arterials, we've almost, at the time we were looking at sidewalks in the 2014 is about when this resolution was adopted, but we were kind of running out of arterial locations. So there was other locations that city manager and the commission at that time felt like that we should be considering, gaps in schools, parks, missing links in just areas that we were missing. And our policy didn't really allow us to do that with city funds. And so this resolution was adopted and put into place at that time so that we could do more sidewalk connectors that weren't maybe not always on an arterial street. Next slide, please. So if you look at the past 20 years, like I said, early 2000s, I feel like it started with kind of North Ohio overpass. We put in a pretty nice sidewalk up there, and South Ohio, the widening south of Magnolia. That was really the first large sidewalk that the city put in that I could find. City Manager Gage and the City Commission at that time we had a KDOT project in that corridor south of Magnolia on the east side of Ohio, and a 10-foot sidewalk was put in there. It's very well used, and that seemed to have started a real trend because I got here in 2008 and it was being built at that time, and we've built a lot of 10-foot trails or aggregate trails since that time. That we were able to get some grant funds in the 2010, 11, 12 from Greater Salina Community Foundation. We did a lot of our levee trails and did some of those in-house, and Parks really got on board with some Sunflower Foundation grants, and we've built quite a few trails and quite a few concrete sidewalks, and we have more that we're looking forward to build, but all of those have been paid for by either grant funds or city-at-large funds. Local street sidewalk construction, as I talked about earlier, per our code, developers or the builders build those in the local streets, residential streets, build those with the house construction. We do budget annually about $50,000 a year for ramps and sidewalk construction. So looking at maybe just the last few years of sidewalk construction, on the next slide, like 2015, I just went back 5 years, basically. We used some of those funds to match a grant that we got for the Lakewood Trail, 10-foot sidewalk right over by Lakewood School. Connected it to the North Ohio overpass and put a sidewalk along Ohio up there as well, 10-foot sidewalks. That was kind of a connector. 2016, we connected along Greeley, Oakdale, Kenwood Park to Ohio, basically, kind of getting, there was no sidewalk on that road, so that was a nice 8-foot trail we put in there. 2017, we did some connections, just some smaller connections, one on South Street, one on over by Ace Hardware, one on Cloud, and I'll have Jacob, there's a link in the Zoom documents for Cloud. If you just pull it up, Google will just pull right up, I think. But I'll show you that, guys, that one if he's able to pull it up. Yeah, right there. It's kind of a neat sidewalk because, as you can see, that was an existing, it's all existing development. So when we have to put in a sidewalk, you can't just say, by golly, we're going to stick it a foot off the right of way. It's really hard to do. We're going to blow away all your trees and your signs, and whatever you got in your yard's gone. Well, this doesn't work very well that way. So as you can see, Jacob, if you can zoom, turn around and go back to the other direction there, you can kind of just see we had to go through and make sure we missed landscaping, and our actual sidewalk goes on the other side of that rock pile. And then as we go, landscaping, nice rock landscaping. It's not just a rock pile. It's it's the dentist, spent a lot of money there with my kids' braces. I'm trying to think of the name of it. But anyway, that's, and as we go further to the west there, you can see we're in somebody's yard, and we kind of had to work around their yard, and the grades were a little tougher, and then we had to get into somebody's driveway as we went through there, and had to do a little driveway work to make it work. That sidewalk actually has some little curbs on it so that we could match their yard and go around their landscaping. So this is just an example of, I would have to say this was a good example of what we'd try to do with sidewalks. If we were approved today to do more sidewalk work in Salina, we feel like this is sometimes what we have to do. You can go back to the slide now, Jacob. Slide before that, if you don't mind. Still going through, let's see, 2000, that map before that, Jacob, one more slide before, there you go. 2019, we were able to work with, actually 18, North Salina Community Development, north of Pacific on Ninth Street, which is a really good example of some sidewalks where they got some Dane Hansen funds, and we were able to partner with them, put in sidewalks up there, and actually repaired a lot of sidewalks up there as well. And with that group, they ended up planting trees and just really making it look nice. It was kind of a front porch project, so that was a kind of a nice sidewalk program. 2019, we were on Ninth Street for a while, for a couple years there with some KDOT funds, and so we repaired a lot of old sidewalks on Ninth Street, put in a few, I believe, as well, and just connected the Hilton Garden Inn in South Salina. That was an example of trying to make a connection where there was a development that we ended a sidewalk, and there was no development, we ended the sidewalk, but we were able to connect the Hilton Garden Inn down there. So that's kind of the last about 5 years of sidewalks in Salina. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so in 2020, in December of 20, was when Rod Franz was on the commission, and he brought up the sidewalk idea of let's look at maybe doing some more sidewalk work, and we had a lot of money in chip seal, and it was almost like we had a little extra money in chip seal because we weren't going to do that much chip seal at that time, and we were able to utilize chip seal as one to say let's do more sidewalk work in 2021. So that was how the CIP got changed at that time. We weren't sure we'd be able to really do a great analysis of how many sidewalks we have and what kind of inventory, but really the winter was pretty good to us. It was pretty cold. We were able to get a few guys out looking at sidewalks, and then Keith Ganzenmuller, our GIS guru, was able to really take our aerial mapping. Our aerial mapping now in 2020 is down to 3-inch accuracy. So you can, as long as there's not a lot of trees around, you can find the sidewalk pretty well. So it was a pretty good way to go around, look where our sidewalks were. And we just did our arterials and collectors. It was a start. Felt like a good start. We'd start with those. So we were able to tell from looking in the field or looking at aerial mapping, and we were able to make a map of whether it's a sidewalk on one side, both sides, neither side. And then as a part of that, in the last year, we've looked at what are the pedestrian generators, bus stops, pedestrian generators also even our food establishments. So we're trying to see where kind of food establishments are, where some of our pedestrian generators are. And so this map gets a little cluttered with all that on there. But if you go to the next map, Jacob, just an example there. So the red is really the places that we do not have sidewalks. Let's see, no sidewalk, yes, both sides. So some of that's, North 5th Street. North 5th Street is interesting. It's kind of a collector. North 9th, north of the levee, doesn't have a sidewalk up there. Those are just some kind of our outskirt areas. North Street over there by Great Plains doesn't have a sidewalk, which could be a good spot for one because it's close to a park. So these are just some of the areas where we were able to kind of show where collectors and arterials don't necessarily have sidewalks on them. Next slide, please. That's the south part of the city, similar situation. Talk about some of these later in some of the slides, but just kind of shows where maybe some of our gaps are. And some of these will show up as our proposed locations for 2021. Next slide, please. This is kind of our overall trail map as well. So we feel like, you can't look at sidewalks without looking at where your trail's at, where your bike route's at. So this is on our website currently. We update this every year have we gotten a few more bike routes with our sharrows, Mr. Hoppick, and our bike lanes. We're methodically getting around the city with these, and as well as improving trails. We have a grant for a trail on Magnolia we just got that this last year, so we'll be able to connect Ohio to over to the mall there on Magnolia. So that'll be a nice wide bike trail. So I don't know if that's proposed. Yeah, it's green, so it's proposed on this map. So we have that on there as proposed for this, next year, I believe, next year or the year after. Next slide, please. Okay, what was nice about it is it seems like we do have sidewalks on most of our streets. There are a few notable gaps, so we'll go through those. Broadway, of course, south of, what is that? I guess, yeah, Crawford to South 9th. That's a pretty big gap. It seems like there's some spots in there we could definitely put some sidewalks in, but there's also some large ditches and some, railroad tracks and some big slopes. It's an old state highway, so the slopes they didn't put a nice slope out like you would in your front yard or in some of our areas where the road matches the right-of-way very well. They're pretty large ditches and pretty large slopes, especially around like Sunset Park and the old putt-putt golf course and stuff over there. I'm dating myself. I can't remember what's there now, but just that area is going to be tough to put a sidewalk in. So that just makes it tough. It's not that we can't do it. It's just we'll have to look at that a little tougher. It's not very easy to go in there and put one in, especially there's also some flood area there that the city actually utilized the ditches for flood capacity. So it actually stores in the ditches, and if you go fill that in and put a sidewalk in, well, if somebody floods down the way, it's something we'd have to do that. It's not as easy to put a sidewalk in there. That's just something we haven't been able to really figure out yet or haven't spent a lot of time on. Next slide, please. Magnolia west of I-35, that's definitely one that Commissioner Davis brought up at one of the meetings recently, and it's a gap. It's a big gap. It's a really great place for a sidewalk if we could get one in there, because you've got K-State, you've got the airport, you've got really the Salina Airport. The whole entire area is disconnected from our community with sidewalks. It's tough. Well, Magnolia has a massive ditch on the north side, which is one of the largest floodplain projects that the city did, was the tunnel under I-35, taking the water off of Central Mall and dumping it in the Dry Creek over there. So that is just a massive ditch, and it would be very hard to fill that in or do anything on that side. So we'd have to look at the south side, which is where the Menards and the Magnolia Point, I believe is what it's called, where that's going. So it'd be nice to look at the south side of Magnolia for a sidewalk there. But it has a bridge, large floodplain. The bridge isn't wide, it's barely wide enough for two vehicles. So it's a massive project to try to figure out a way to get a sidewalk and a really improved road in there. 9th Street north of the levee, kind of a similar situation. It's an old state highway, ditches, not a lot of easy places to put sidewalks, and arguably it's not as many probably walkers up there, but still it'd be nice to be able to connect our community. So that's definitely a need and a hope someday, but it's a pretty tough place to try to get a sidewalk. Next slide, please. South 9th, south of Todd Circle, so that we did connect Hilton Garden Inn, but we haven't gone any further south than that, which is the car, kind of the along MacArthur and the car dealers and the future, Phillips Lighting, which Great Plains facility there. I mean, it's an option someday to, if we are able to connect that area. So it's definitely a need, but as you can see, most of these sidewalks are more on the outskirts of town. Most of the middle of town, luckily, we have sidewalks except for maybe Broadway. Ohio Street south of Schilling is pretty rural, pretty ditched at this time, not a lot of development yet, but it is in the city limits, so we just thought we'd bring it up. Next slide, please. Okay, the priority factors when we were looking at sidewalks, I'll just read 1991. I'll just read kind of originally when they were, one of my slides had done over for the last 20 years before, probably around 2000, there was 1980s and 90s where we were just putting in a lot of sidewalks everywhere. So we'd either not put them in for a while or what the deal was, but we identified about 25 miles on this blue sheet that I found from Roy Dudark. Basically, they were looking at criteria to put in a sidewalk along the missing arterials. Criteria were pertaining to traffic movements, pedestrian use, public safety, right-of-way availability, connection to existing sidewalks, and then really just missing segments whenever they could connect a gap. So that was in the 90s. A lot of these sidewalks were assessed with benefit districts. So when Wayne Nelson and myself come to you for a subdivision development, assessment, a benefit district for all the different things that go into, say, Stone Lake or Magnolia Hills or something. Well, they were coming to the city 3 or 4 times a year with benefit districts for sidewalk projects. So it was pretty onerous, and we're talking $5,000 assessments, if that, not even really that high, because it was a 50-50 assessment. So it was a lot of work for the project, but they did get a lot done that way. So that was just kind of the history of how that worked. We looked at that, we said, well, we're still kind of looking at the same factors today. We kind of look at street functional class, how many people are going to use that sidewalk possibly. If you're along the more busier roads, it seems like people do congregate to those areas. So you're going to have more foot traffic along your busier streets. Connecting links, just gaps, where do we have gaps at? It's interesting, you'll see worn paths. So it's just a lot of the ones we've looked at for this year, it's like there is a path there. It's like people are actually walking on there, and it doesn't seem like, I never see them walking on there, but there must be enough because there's a worn path there. Proximity to school, of course, parks, bus stops. We've definitely talked to the Michelle Griffin with OCCK, and we'd like to connect whatever bus stops we can, and whenever those get modified or moved, and they've done a pretty good job of doing that themselves, but we like to partner with them when we can. And food establishments, whether we're trying to get to a grocery store or a food facility or whether it's a quick shop or whatever, it's just nice to be able to connect those. Safety concerns where we have just no sidewalks and people walking in the street is, a lot of people don't mind walking in the street in your neighborhoods, and some people prefer that actually. But where we have busier roads, we don't want them in the street, it's just good to make sure we have a sidewalk there. Cost sharing, wherever we can cost share is nice. So sometimes, like I spoke earlier, we're able to cost share with grants or OCCK or school districts, just depends. LMI census tract. So the map that we had earlier, also I failed to remember to talk about that. Some of our LMI census tracts are listed on there. So that's like, I can't remember exactly what the LMI is.
Low to moderate income.
Low to moderate income, okay. So we're trying to make sure we serve those areas as well with our sidewalk. Those seem to be areas where people need the sidewalks more, maybe not as many with vehicles. It's the blue. I'm trying to remember, there's a lot of different colors on there, a lot going on that map. So we made it so we could turn all those things off and on, but to print it out for you guys, it just ends up, everything's on there, the light blue, okay. And then lastly, we had a park survey I guess it's been a few years ago now, but how satisfied were they with their areas, their connection to parks? It was just something else we felt that would be decent to put on the map for picking sidewalks, as well as a good thing to turn in when you're looking for a grant or for a funding opportunity for a sidewalk. Some of these things factor into whether or not we could get some money for those areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so things we haven't done yet. We haven't really waited or assign points to these. Is any of these things worth more or less than others? We really haven't done that. We've just kind of looked at all those, at those criteria, and we've been able to come up with a program for this year, and that seems to be what's been done in the past, actually. And especially, something to consider is requests. So we do have some people who have called in that say we'd like a sidewalk on their street. Well, that's something to definitely consider. How close to a school is it? Where's it at? Some people aren't excited about having sidewalks in their front yard, but it's definitely something to consider, and we can take a look at that. So some of those things we haven't really prioritized or factored, but they're all in there. Grants and funding. So yeah, if we get a grant or a fund for something, for some kind of an area or a connection, it helps us to have some money was it the share? Usually there's a cost share, so you'd have a share for that. Those would go to the top of the list if we got a grant for something. And then the next two slides just show kind of where those areas are for 2021 that we've found. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, there's a start at the top here. These are just, I shouldn't say, they're mostly arterials and collectors where we don't have, where we're trying to fill in gaps. We just don't have a sidewalk. So up here on the north, this is north of the levee. This is around Euclid. Actually, it's not north. It's just south of the levee. We have a gap, a really old sidewalk that's hardly even fine on the west side of 9th Street, north of Euclid, that connects to, that could connect to the levee, which is Thomas Park as well. So you got Levee Trail, you got Thomas Park, you have a gap and a sidewalk. I feel like that's a good location for one. That is North Street. North Street doesn't have many sidewalks on it at all, so we're looking at trying to get some on North Street, and that's just the start of it, basically. That was something that Ken Kennedy, when he was with the school district, he really felt like North Street was a need or a factor, and we were never able to really get any traction with that, but we feel like it's definitely been on our list for a while, so it's one. This one here is just Ash, just at the end of Ash Street. We drive by it every day, and Kent said we don't have a sidewalk there. And I said, I thought we did, but he was right, we do not. And it's just right there at the red barn there for the insurance guy. There's no sidewalk in that area, and you can see there's a worn path there. So people are using that, going to Lakewood School there, so we feel like that's a good connection. That's Ash is an arterial, or a minor arterial. Marymount has a worn path on the east side, north of Crawford, that kind of connects to, I think it's Pheasant there, and it's a worn path. It's been there forever, but it's enough that people are wearing out the path there, so I feel like that's a good spot. Courtney over here by one of the parks. And here's Roach. Rod specifically mentioned Roach when the commission had this discussion in December, and Roach definitely has some gaps on it. It has, the Salina Central School is there, Hughesner Elementary School. It's not going to be easy to put a sidewalk in there, but it does look like you're connecting spots, and it is possible. So it'd be one we'd have to try to work around existing landscaping and trees and that kind of thing, but it is something that we could do. Next slide, please. Here's, let's see, got a few gaps over here. This is South Middle School. South Middle School doesn't have a sidewalk on the north side of Wayne. That's another one that the school district requested years ago, and we just haven't really ever gotten around to it or been able to partner with them to do it. But can't remember, Wayne is a collector, so it's the north side of Wayne in that area would be a nice connection to a couple of sidewalks there on each end. Just looking at a few other spots here. Looks like Albert along Sacred Heart School there. Another connection on Albert by Wendy's, and over there just by Dillon Southgate. Or, sorry, Dillon Southgate. The Ark Church now. There's just a few areas, a few other connections here. One on, it's like Belmont, little spot there. Remember the name of that street? I can't see that very well, but it's Oxford. There we go. Yeah, Oxford. That's right. It's just a short section, but we're connecting Ohio sidewalks to some sidewalks in that subdivision. Down here, one off Virginia, just north of Schilling, kind of connects that subdivision as well. And then lastly is this Coronado kind of connection north of Neal, and that's one that's just been requested by a property owner in there, and definitely is a high volume pedestrian way and almost somewhat of a collector. It's not actually on our collector map. Our collector map goes over here to on Neal to the west and goes up Key, but arguably people will use Ray quite a bit as well, especially when it was connected in the last, I guess, 20 years or so. It didn't always go through all the way to Schilling, but it does now. So it's kind of a collector. And there is a sidewalk all the way from Ray to the, or on Ray, all the way from Schilling to the north, all the way to Coronado School. But there is not one north of Neal to Belmont. So it's an area that it'd be nice to get a sidewalk in there. Now, I think that could be one of our toughest areas, because where there's people who are very excited about sidewalks, you will find people who are just as not excited about them. So it's one of those things where if we want to go forward with this, we'll have to just, I guess, work with people and then which side do you pick? So that's the other thing is, I'm okay with a sidewalk as long as it's on the other side. So that's the other challenge with sidewalk locations. And if you have some more existing sidewalks you're connecting, you can kind of justify that, but that's an area where we've got a couple of sidewalks on that road, and I think it's 2 to 2. There's 2 on the west side and 2 on the east side, so it's going to be tough to figure out which side to really put it on.
Ask a quick question.
Yes, sir.
In a situation like that, do you typically wait for the neighborhood to ask, or do you bring your infinite wisdom and say, this is what you really need?
I'd say that since I've been here, we have not done a sidewalk program where we've been in a neighborhood like that. So it's always been along our arterials, our collectors areas, mostly businesses or commercial mostly, or short connections where we did on Cloud, we connected a couple of yards to, they were residential yards. We were able to get that through. But if they'd not wanted it or not wanted to cooperate, we'd have probably not pushed the issue at that time. We weren't interested in that. So this would be a step further in pressing a sidewalk into a neighborhood with their tight houses, existing trees, driveways. It'll be a challenge in there. Some of the areas won't be that tough because it's a small connection, and you got a sidewalk here, you got a sidewalk there. We're coming out to connect it. It looks like it fits, and people are okay. I guess that's all right.
I know costs have, vary quite a bit, and they're probably up, at the present time. But what is the approximate cost to do a block-long sidewalk?
It's about $7 a square foot, I guess, is kind of what we have. So when you say a block, you're thinking about 600 feet probably. Usually our residential sidewalk, well, we're doing mostly arterials and collectors, so they're 5 foot wide. So it's about 25,000 for a block.
And do we do that with city staff, or do we contract that out?
We contract it out. The city, we design it, or city staff lays them out and does the plans for them, but then we contract it out to, and most of the time it's been Lancaster or Bob Davis or Smoky Hill, some of those contractors, yeah. Although I shouldn't say that. Mr. Toich here did a really nice sidewalk with city staff up on Glen to connect by the oil well up there. They connected Metal Arc School with Glen Avenue there. So it was a really cool site. It was not very long. Wasn't a massive project, but it was really well used, and everybody loves it. So every now and then our guys get into that, depending on how many utility breaks we have, and depends on what's going on. But just, yeah.
You know of any communities that have examples of floating types of sidewalks, almost bridges? What I was wondering about, because along with the development and Commissioner Davis's concerns with connectivity from basically Menards east, that is a huge gap between
Yep.
the airport, and I mean, it just feels like it's disconnected.
Yep, very much.
And, I mean, I don't know, I don't know what the cost of the dirt work would be, but that is a steep ditch, and leveling that, bringing in the footage of dirt that would require to add a concrete sidewalk. I was just thinking, if there was pylons that would still allow for drainage.
Right.
You could access either the north or south side then. I don't know. I was just wondering if that was something that could be considered, or if there was examples of that. I mean, I'm sure that's not cheap either, but just something to.
Yeah, it's almost like an elevated sidewalk.
Yeah.
Kind of like, yeah.
And then, I mean, I remember
Good idea.
on Broadway, we used to have the over,
Oh, yeah.
the bridge kind of right there
Right.
by the school district stuff. I have no idea what kind of, maybe cost share there could possibly be out there, but doing something over.
KDOT probably paid for that.
What's that?
I say KDOT probably paid for that. 'cause
Well, that's
it was
what
a
I'm-
Urban highway.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe there could be some potential, I don't know after the fact if that's even really feasible or possible, but something to get us over connecting to the mall area and
Yeah, I'm trying to think, Magnolia at least has a sidewalk on the south side, is that right? There over I-35, so it's really just trying to get from I-35 to the
yeah,
west.
right, yeah, it does have.
Yeah, it does have one, so that's helpful. That's, in the many years in Salina, even, they weren't building sidewalks with a lot of our projects, so luckily we either asked for it or KDOT would rather just build a highway bridge, and so luckily they're not like that anymore, but there was a time where they did not put sidewalks on any of their bridges, so
Yeah.
I think we're pretty lucky to have them on a few of those at least.
It seems like a lot of our issues with sidewalks sometimes are because of tree roots and stuff. I mean, we had that on 9th Street when we redid that.
Right.
A lot of trees were taken out. Do we have any kind of guidance, I hate to say ordinance, of how close to a sidewalk a tree can be planted or anything?
I don't know that we have separation. We have guidance about when there's a deflection in the sidewalk, when it, what threshold that is before it has to be repaired. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but.
Well, in City Forester, we did work with Brett Lammer on that, because there are times where even if we have a project or if we have a sidewalk that's been cited for repairs, a lot of times there's a reason for that, and there's a tree right there, so the property.
But I'm talking about also new, if we have sidewalks, we don't want to create a problem 20 years down the
We
road
do not,
either. So
we do not have
I
that.
do remember, though, when we were talking about the 9th Street corridor and all those trees were taken out, and
Right.
we had the opportunity, we provided replacement trees for any property owners that wanted them, and I recall that the guidance was really strict. If you wanted to accept a tree from the city, it couldn't be on the right-of-way, so it couldn't
Right,
be
had
on the
to-
parking.
couldn't be between
It
the
had to-
street and the
Yeah, it had to be in
sidewalk.
between the sidewalk and the house, and had to be so many feet back from it, and it was, in my opinion, it didn't do a lot to get a tree canopy back, but there was some pretty strict guidance about where the city was going to invest its money in
That's true.
replacing trees.
I think we do make somewhere either on our website or through the forestry department, I think we do have a list of recommended trees, I believe.
Right.
For
Correct.
citizens, yeah.
Well, and they have, I thought on the north of Pacific, when the North Salina Community Group did those, they did plant some trees, I thought, between the curb and the sidewalk, but they were a smaller tree. It's like more like a Bradford, not a Bradford player, but a shorter tree, because we can't get them in the power lines, and there was a lot of issues. So you can plant smaller trees in that area, but you don't want to plant a large, massive tree in a 4-foot green space, because it's just going to be a liability for curb and sidewalk forever. So, I guess we can talk with Brett a little bit more about that, or our city forester. Because I don't know if we have those kind of criteria now. New subdivision, if somebody just puts a tree wherever they want, I guess I'm not sure we really police that.
I could have sworn we had a discussion about that on one subdivision, about the fact that they were not going to be able to put trees in the public right-of-way, and I'll have to think on this later, but, because that was a big deal. I remember that not enough detail to be helpful.
Let's go to the next slide. I got a few things here. We're about 5 more minutes, but I just want to talk about, I was surprised, City of Emporia has a program. They're not a large city by any means, but they have kind of a pot of money they use for property owners to share. Say, if you want to repair your sidewalk, we will partner with you on that. So it's kind of more of a proactive approach, whereas right now we have kind of a reactive approach where we're not out actively looking for sidewalk problems, but if somebody calls one in, then we have to go cite the property owner. So, and historically, we haven't done a lot of city funds or sidewalk repair. That's not been, we've done ADA ramps, we've done new sidewalks, but we have not done city repairs much, other than maybe on some of our arterial projects or KDOT projects. So anyway, that's just an interesting approach. Something that we've looked at here as well, that we haven't proposed it yet, but before COVID, we were about to. We had come up with a plan that felt like was similar to this, but we never actually brought it forward, and we've kind of got it sit on the shelf now. If you're interested in doing that, we could bring that forward at a later date. And the next slide is the City of Derby. Similar situation there. They're a little newer city and don't have too many gaps anymore. They've pretty much filled in most of their gaps, they said. But they do, of course, their bike paths. So as you know, we've put in more concrete sidewalks and more bike paths in the last 10 to 15 years. And so eventually those are going to be needing repairs. And then they do budget a certain amount for sidewalk repair annually as just a city. So whenever the money runs out, that one doesn't happen. So just wait till the next year and do that repair. So anyway, it's just something, if we want to get into the repair of sidewalks, we can do that. But historically, we have not done that in Salina.
What's the commission's position on creating some kind of a sidewalk fund for citizens to access? I mean, is that something that we'd like staff to pursue?
Would that be
or-
the Emporia example?
Yes.
I think I like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the thought of that proactive approach, but, so let's say the fund is depleted,
Right.
and then somebody calls in and complains about someone's sidewalk, and, I forget what our timing is. They have 2 months
60
or whatever.
days, right? Yeah, 2
Okay.
months, right,
So
right.
they have to get that repaired. Well, there is no funds for them
For 6 months.
for
Yeah,
6 months.
it has to be proactive. That's the only way it works.
Okay.
So if it's reactive, where you're gambling if you don't fix your side, I know my sidewalk's bad, but I'm just hoping nobody turns me in. Well, then you're the one.
Okay.
If they turn you in, you're going to fix it.
That's what I was going to say.
That's
But
how
at
it
that
works.
point, if there was funds available,
Well, from how it works with them, they said, no, it has to be a proactive. So if somebody turns you in, then you are stuck. But if you're
Okay.
actually being proactive about it and getting on the list and getting into, that seemed like that was the way it worked the best. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other ways it could work, but that was just trying to keep it separated in that way was the only way we were able to understand it.
and then, I mean, what if you went out and assessed a property and you thought, we're going to pay for all but $400 of this, for instance?
Right.
And this really isn't that bad. This is just cosmetic stuff or
Mm-hmm.
what have you. I mean, we'd probably have to have some sort of criteria.
That's a good question, yeah, because we have our,
Can I have a pink sidewalk?
Yeah.
Well, we do have the criteria that constitutes when we would provide notice. So I think if we wanted to, we could use that same
Use that,
criteria and
right.
say that you have to rise to that level.
yeah,
to be
your
eligible.
sidewalk doesn't meet any of this criteria, so
Yeah.
that's, I mean, you can sure fix it if you want, but at this
It
point,
may
it's
be
not
cracked,
bad enough
but-
to get there, right? So maybe that seems like that could be an
And again, I
option.
know we only have
Yeah.
about a minute left, but,
Okay,
and I guess when we go through the planning commission, it's basically now sidewalks are required in neighborhoods,
Correct.
pretty much.
correct.
Yeah.
So, commissioners, I think if you have an interest in setting up that sidewalk program, it'd probably be a little bit of both. We'd have some funds set aside for that, and then also try to implement that original intention of, allocating the 200,000 and start to implement street gap, sidewalk gap repairs as staff described, and would annually just come to you based on the inventory, based on the priorities, and propose to you a street, or I keep saying street, sidewalk program for annual implementation.
Did we have a dollar amount on those identified?
Yeah, that map is around $200,000. What was it, the pages where I had proposed sidewalks north, proposed sidewalks south. That was around $200,000. That was our kind of what we thought we were going to have to hit, that's what we budgeted, or tried to find sidewalks for.
And I just had one question, because the maps were, a little bit
Yeah, they're hard to read.
hard to read.
Sure.
But I remember from going to Centennial Park Neighborhood Association meeting that
Mm-hmm.
they didn't seem to have much, if any, sidewalks in that area. And that was one of the reasons why they were advocating for creating a walking path around the Centennial Park. But I'm not sure I saw that under the gap list.
Not yet.
That neighborhood. So that's one that I think we definitely need to get on the list, because
Okay.
that's like the youngest census demographic in the city, and you've got a lot of people out there using that
Sure.
park. And
You will see, I believe, in the next month or so, we have part of Lauren, of our planning department, has a couple of grant, I don't know what you call the two grant people that we have, Mike. We have
Oh,
grant
fellows,
specialists.
fellows.
Fellows, if we have some fellows, and that's the area that they're going to be proposing on, so there you go.
Well, fantastic.
So hopefully, yeah, but we were mostly looking at our trails and collectors and schools, and so, yeah, but that's a park, so, yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess arguably that should be in
Yeah.
there as well. So, but yeah, we're at least hopefully coming back to you with something like that.
Okay,
I
great.
do believe we have some people on Zoom that
Yes.
may want an opportunity to address you. Don't know.
Yeah, if you would like to address the commission very quickly, we have about 2 minutes, and we're going to take a quick break before our 4 o'clock meeting. But if you would like to speak, or if you have questions, if you could raise your virtual hand, and Mr. Wood will unmute you, and you can speak. All right. All right, no takers. All right, well.
Thank you.
We'll see you back here at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much, Mr. Stack and Mr. Toich. All right, welcome to the Monday, October 18th, 2021 Salina City Commission meeting. Before we have roll call, I'd like to confirm that staff that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been provided.
Yes.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll proceed to roll call.
Mayor Hodges,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Here.
Commissioner Peck,
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
If you're able, would you please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? Thank you. We don't have any awards and proclamations today, so we'll proceed to Citizens Forum. And Citizens Forum is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the commission. Please identify yourself by your first and last name, tell us where you're from, and limit your remarks to 3 minutes. And as we went over last week, if you do have any questions, guidelines for participation can be found as part of our agenda. And finally, before we get started on Citizens Forum, some of you may have heard that we did have a positive COVID person in attendance last week, and the person did not mask or respect social distancing. So I know that I did not have contact information for some of the citizens that were in attendance last week. I reached out to as many as I had contact information for. So if you were at that meeting, please keep an eye on any symptoms that you may be having, and know that if you were at that meeting last week, you were exposed to COVID. And finally, I would just like to ask everyone, if you are symptomatic and you're not sure if it's a cold, if it's COVID, if it's allergies, we have lots of ways to participate in a city commission meeting, and I would urge you to be cautious and to use one of those other ways to participate with the city commission. So with all that out of the way, are there any citizens that would like to speak today, either here in the room or online? And if you are online, if you could either raise your virtual hand or wave at the camera or anything, we will get you unmuted and you can speak.
It looks like we have one.
Okay.
Mr. Wallace, I'll give you access to unmute.
Oh. Mr. Wallace, if you can hear us, can you hit the unmute button?
There should be a box that pops up on your screen that asks you to unmute.
Well,
Looks like we're having technical difficulties here.
all right. Well, hopefully, Mr. Wallace can connect with us either via email, phone, or regular mail to be heard. And with that, if there are no other takers, I'll go ahead and close Citizens Forum, and we will proceed to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time.
Item 5.1, public hearing, Rural Housing Incentive District. 5.1A, conduct public hearing. 5.1B, approve ordinance number 21-11090, establishing a rural housing incentive district within the city and adopting a plan for the development of housing and public facilities in such district and making certain findings in conjunction therewith. 5.1C, approve resolution waiving the residential building fees associated with the Southview Estates Rural Housing Incentive District.
All right, well, with that, I guess we will go ahead and open the public hearing, and I will turn it over to Ms. Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. We have previously discussed this item. Today, as the clerk mentioned, we have 3 items in front of you. 1, we are conducting the public hearing Followed by that, the commission can take action through Ordinance 21-11090, which would create the RHID district. And then you also have Resolution 217994, which is related to the waiving of residential building permit fees associated with this project. As a reminder, you first heard about this project in May of 2021, where the request for the formation of an RHID was made. Part of that process, you passed a resolution that was then sent to Department of Commerce. Commerce approved that, basically saying that we have all the criteria necessary to form an RHID. That then was brought forward, and as part of the RHID process, we then need to bring forward a resolution calling for a public hearing. We did that in the end of July with a public hearing that was originally scheduled for September 13th, 2021. Due to publication errors, we requested that public hearing essentially happen, but we also needed to have a second one in order to get those numbers right. You do have the full transcripts of that public hearing that was open and closed on September 13th, 2021, included in your packet. Today, we are fulfilling that second public hearing in order to meet our statutory requirements for the RHID. You also have in front of you the request for the waiving of building permit fees. This process, or this request, is a little different. It's not within your housing policy. It's not something typically we do, but it was a request on the behalf of the developers. As you'll see, staff calculated those fees associated with the number of units that were put forward by the developer. And if we were to waive both the calculated fee plus the water tap fee and plan review fee, the total amount for the Rhine Edition or Southview Estates would be $104,676. Touching a little bit on the housing policy, this was a request pre-adoption of your housing policy, which was adopted in July of 2021, this year. Part of that process, you identified criteria both for IRBs and for RHIDs. This would be the first RHID that we'll have done as a community, and the original request came before the policy. You did note to the applicant, that's fine, keep going, but you did want information in your staff report related to, how does this really fit in, and are we even on track with that? I think you'll be pleased to see that you are very much on track with the policy's needs, even though this came prior to that. We have some original criteria, kind of called the starting gate. If you can get through that gate, then we get into the criteria. So this project met that initial, that gate to get through. Construction will be completed in less than 3 years, and the price points were within that identified area of $250,000 per unit or less, or 30% of all units priced below $225,000. And that would indicate that we've got the single-family detached homes are priced at $225,000 as a point of reference, and the townhomes are priced at $190,000 per unit. So making that. Once that original or initial criteria is completed, we look at the project criteria that gets, it's point-based with the items that you as a commission identify wanting most, having the highest point value. And then each one of those that is applicable to the project, those points are then totaled. You'll notice at the bottom of the table, we then look at how many years of the tax allocation period would be relevant based on the number of points. So ideally, that whole 25-year tax allocation period is given to a project that has, all or as many of the points as possible you can get. And so we start at 8 points or more being for that full 25-year period. If you are less than 8 points, then the duration of the tax allocation period is smaller. The Southview Estates project totals 10 points. You'll see both picking up points in the gross density above 4 units per acre, a new market product such as owner-occupied or townhomes. There are townhomes part of this project. Immediately available water and sewer. This project is ready to go. It's one of our more buildable, ready-to-go sites in town. They will have to move some water and sewer in site, but as far as access, it's there. 40% or more of the units are priced below $225,000. We looked at that number earlier, between the $225 and the $190. So essentially in this project, 100% of the units are below that price point. And then mixing densities and housing types, this does have 2 housing types. And then lastly, for having at least 50% of all proposed lots with full public improvements available for construction within 18 months of the final project approval. As you'll note in the timeline for this project, the first phase will have all public infrastructure installed, and they will start building as the last pieces of that go on. So a good number of lots and homes will start to be available here within the first 18 months. So also meeting that criteria. As far as fiscal note goes, there's no direct fiscal cost associated with the adoption of Ordinance 21-11090, which is for the formation of the RHID. The city's creation and administration expenses will be reimbursed by Southview Estates. Once formed, the RHID will capture the incremental increase in real property taxes created by the new housing development. The capture period would be 25 years, with the amount of property tax increase returned to the developers 100% of the eligible amount. And Resolution 217994, if adopted, would be waiving approximately $104,676 of fees associated with building permits. With that, I am happy to take questions.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Driscoll?
What's the estimate of property tax increment that would be returned over the 25-year period?
Commissioner Davis, I do not remember off the top of my head, and that is a very good question that I will remember to put in all future RHIDs when we get to this point, and I can look it up because we've had it in a previous one.
Okay.
And I think it is also in the development plan that was part of the packet.
Yeah,
Let me look that up really quick.
and is our discussion now just on
Okay.
5.1B?
Go with the increment. Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's about $6.5 million. You'll see in the financial component of the development plan.
So that's
Oh, that's
property.
a little tiny one?
Sorry. It looked bigger on our screen. When I
I tried.
So it's
Okay, that explains.
$6,550,855.
So that is returned, just in case there's anyone else out there thinking in little steps, that amount is returned to the developers in addition to whatever they sell their lots and properties for.
Correct. So it's what's being captured over those 25 years. So what's happening is as the property values are increasing, because right now they're at that ag value, and so they're going to increase from there, and then that's getting captured and pushed back to them. It is based on that amount that's being requested. So if, let's say, 23 years down the road, if that full incremented amount is reached, then actually the RHID is done. So it wouldn't just keep going for a couple of more years. It's about getting to that amount, but they have 25 years to get to that amount. Does that make sense?
Does the 25 years start from day one, or does it start when they're completed? I guess my question is the 25 years actually correlate more into like 23 or 22 years of tax abatements?
So Madam Mayor, if you wouldn't mind, we also have Dominic Eck with Gilmore and Bell,
Okay.
who is here, so I think he would be good to be answering some of these questions with me.
Okay, great. I'll welcome you to the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Dominic Eck with Gilmore and Bell, on council for the city. It's a great question, and it is essentially the latter. It starts now when you create the district, assuming the district gets created, and you have 25 years from that point. And so during that build-up period, yes, there's not a lot of increment expected for those first couple of years, especially because once you get built, then the taxes, the houses go on the tax rolls for the next year, which are payable at the end of that year. So there is a couple-year lag, and it is more like, 22 and a half-ish years that money would be flowing into that increment.
And the base year for the valuation is the year?
This year,
ago?
when the district is created, so the current assessed valuation of the property as it exists now, which is.
And we don't have a provision for that to be assessed residential rates?
No,
No, the issue had come up before, and I guess it
right.
died an ugly death then. Okay.
Well, I do think it's worth noting, I mean, one of the things that when we're looking at property tax tools, that ag to something else is not necessarily a bad thing if you're trying to find, because a lot of these work on the gap, right? Whether we're talking RHID or IRB, we want the initial value to be low because they're going to improve, and that's where the tools become useful. So it's not, it hasn't always been applicable for us to have that ag designation on certain things we wanted taxed as residential, but in this case, it isn't necessarily a bad thing because it makes those projects more financially viable, starting at that ag designation.
Unless the city needs some of that money for its services.
True, but
That, that determination is not within the discretion of the city or you as the governing body, though. It's outside of our control.
So the 36 months to build begins the day we approve the RHID, is that correct?
so if you look on page 3 of the blue sheet, you'll notice towards the end of the page, there's a distinct timeline for the project. It's also laid out in the
Right.
development plan. So basically, once you take action today, then there is a 30-day protest period. From that 30-day protest period, they need to commence construction within 90 days. So
When you
that's
say
when the project
construction,
starts.
that's on the infrastructure.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's, so 90 days from there. Upon that, you've got 18 months after commencement of construction. We have completion of at least 14 single-family homes and 11 townhomes. Then 24 months after commencement of construction, completion of at least 30 single-family homes and 44 townhomes. With 36 months after commencement of construction, substantial completion of all internal infrastructure improvements and completion of 42 single-family homes and 66 townhomes available for sale, which is the full project.
And this is probably not a question for Gilmore Bell, probably more for the developers, but with the supply chain the way it is, when do we feel like we'd be at the place that we'll actually see something going vertical?
I would definitely leave that answer to the developers. I
Yeah.
will tell you, while doing the development agreement and meeting with the developers, we did try to be conscious of that, hence why we kind of worked with time periods, making it easier to understand, you know, within 90 days, if we said a particular date and product arrived a week later, it's harder to kind of pinpoint that, where within a window it'd be easier with the supply chain the way it is right now. Also noting, the development agreement does highlight within that there are certain circumstances in which the developer may need to come back. I mean, certain things that are beyond their control.
Okay, that was, I guess, a question. With what's going on now, I was concerned that if we got ourselves tied in too tightly, that we wouldn't have any flexibility. Okay. Guess I just should have asked the question that way.
Any further questions for?
Are we discussing just 1B right now?
Let's go ahead and just do, the Rural Housing Incentive District on, in this discussion period.
Yeah.
And then we will move on to the building fee question after we've taken action on 21-11090.
And Madam Mayor, I would note that the applicants are here and available if you would so like to hear from them.
Right, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Eck, I appreciate
Thank you.
you being here today. If the applicants would like to speak today, you're more than welcome to approach the podium and
If not, I probably
And
have,
if-
I have a
if-
question for somebody, probably.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor. Ross Vogel, Heartland Housing Partners, here on behalf of the developer. We've covered a lot of ground on this project already, so I'd probably just stand for questions unless there's something, or I'd stand for questions and see if there's something specific that you'd like to hear from us.
So the single-family units, we're anticipating to be at a cost of $225,000, and that includes the lot.
Yes.
What would those, without this incentive and everything, what would the cost be to build these?
Yeah, we've calculated, and it's a moving target right now, kind
Yeah.
of to your supply chain, probably $37,500 to $45,000 more. I mean, the price of a lot.
That's kind of,
And that's where you know, to go further, and this is kind of interesting conversation, then you have an 1,100 square foot house that is $265,000. That's a pretty long day.
Yeah.
So I commend the developers or the gentleman here locally. I do this across the state, and I haven't had anyone willing to take on this type of product. So I commend them because it's a price point that's needed, it's a product that's needed, and we just, starting about 2008, we started building 15 to 2,500 square foot houses, and that's all you see, so.
Well,
And in your market specifically, I think right now, 315,000 with $200 specials a month is,
Well, as much as I,
What's up?
I don't like giving away property taxes or whatever. I think, from running for commission again, one of the things that's come up at every forum is housing. And one of the things we've discussed is we somehow have to get the housing to match the jobs. And I think these price points, and from being in this business these, the values have gone up significantly, that if we're trying to reach a certain demographics, this is, these are the prices we're going to have to try to reach, so.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here today.
appreciate it.
Do we have any questions or comments in regard to the RHID ordinance number 21-11090 from members of the public, either here today or online?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chad Farber here in Salina. Commissioner Hoppick said it probably better than I could state it right now. We need this housing and this price point. We have people who are looking for housing. We have people who need housing. And I would say this price point and even a little bit lower would be beneficial for our community. I understand the supply chain issues. I understand the timing issues. But I would highly encourage to move forward with this RHID, with the incentivization part, and let's get these developers going as soon as possible. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? I see Mr. Robinson is waving his hand from the Salina Community Economic Development Organization. Could we unmute Mr. Robinson?
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. It's great to have the opportunity to speak in favor of the RHID, this individual project, and the use of RHID incentives for the community. As you all have spent many months working through this process, I want to commend all of you all on really getting your hands deep into the guts of improving the housing situation here in Salina. These two programs are going to really make differences in the development in the community, and we're seeing that with multiple developers coming forward and looking at the community. So again, I just want to put our support behind this project, behind this tool, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak in favor of it. And we'll wish the developers great luck and low bids on the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Is there anyone else online who would like to speak? And if not, I have a question of order. Do we leave the public hearing open while we take the action and then proceed to the next item? Or does the public hearing close with the RHID, with action on the RHID?
Mr. Bengtson has no microphone.
Dominic Eck with Gilmore and Bell again. The public hearing is a statutorily required hearing pursuant to the RHID Act.
Okay.
And so you may go ahead and close that public hearing and then take action on the ordinance and then proceed with the rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that
So, and if I
clarification.
may, we made reference to entering the transcript into the record, but I would encourage you to formally acknowledge entering the transcript into the record while the hearing is open before you close it.
Okay, so we have fulfilled the following requirements. We have called the public meeting to order. We've entered into the record the transcript of the comments received on September 13th, 2021. We've now conducted the public hearing, and at this point, we will close the public hearing. And I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action on ordinance number 21-11090.
Mayor, I move approval of ordinance number 21-11090.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve on first reading ordinance number 21-11090. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes 5-0. Which brings us to item 5.1C, which is the request for waiving the residential building fees associated with the project. And I don't know, Ms. Driscoll, if you have anything to add to that beyond what's in the blue sheet and what you covered? Okay.
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Any questions for staff?
I have more comment than a question.
Okay. I guess I've got it. If no one else has questions, I guess I have a couple. I mean, we just finished reviewing our housing plan and developing with Marty Schuker the benefit packages that we can offer to developers. And nowhere in that did we list waiver of building fees, correct? I mean, that's not, I mean, I understand that the policy's flexible and it's designed to be flexible for us to meet things, but that wasn't something that Mr. Schuker called out in helping us establish the, our guidelines for incentive use.
It was never not on the table. I think our major objective when Marty was trying to get the policy written was the two big hurdles we knew we had, which was RHID and IRB. It is meant to kind of grow with us, and I think if you look back at staff reports, I am in no way trying to veer either way, but that is an incentive that some places use. And if that's something the body wishes, I mean, one, that kind of direction doesn't need to happen at the moment, but that would be good to know if that's something you want us to add to the policy. Wouldn't have anticipated that we would talk about updating the policy while we're in the middle of this application, but it is, I mean, we checked, it is within your purview as the commission to waive these if this is your choice. I highlighted in here, it is a bit precedent setting, and I would anticipate that if this is the decision you make, that I will probably be back very soon having that conversation about updating the policy to include this tool. It's just we moved at such a clipped pace this spring. There's no way I could have developed every tool we could have needed in there by July.
Right.
And then to support Ms. Driscoll a little bit, we had a conversation about this very topic and you know, bringing, and we felt we definitely had an obligation to bring the request forward, and we discussed the appropriateness of the request. And it really kind of centered around the sense of urgency to try to create affordable workforce housing for the jobs that are being created, and this ongoing conversation about whether we're going to keep pace with the economic development success that we had. So in the interest of trying to move forward projects and recognizing that the scoring criteria that Ms. Driscoll went over with you kind of creates a threshold of a project that merits incentives, we felt like then bringing forward the building permits was at least in keeping with the overall intent.
And I will note that Southview states, when they first came to the body in May, did identify that they were hoping to do three things to make their financial equation work. They were looking for the MIH application, which you approved staff submitting that application at your September 13th meeting, which we have. They requested the formation of the RHID, and they requested a waiver of building permit fees.
But we were still under discussion with our consultant at that point.
Yes.
So if we didn't think of it for the money we were paying the consultant, I would hope he would have thought of it and mentioned it.
We did think of it. It was just of all the things, you know, I guess we weren't in the position to kind of get into what are the ramifications if we just say all housing at such and such a level. I mean, if you look at Marty's conversations, what we had Marty do was get us enough to kind of get through those two big asks, which were RHID and IRB, because those have million-dollar consequences with those decisions in front of you. If the body wants to waive building permit fees on the regular, then we need to come up with a policy. How many units, what price point, those types of things. And to what Mr. Scragg is saying, what Marty did do to leave that door open is that whole intro to that policy is very, very open and leaves a lot of interpretation for you guys to make choices. I guess what I'm trying to say is, we didn't not do that in July because we didn't think it was a viable tool. It just wasn't the primary tool at the moment. Because what you had been asking us was figure out how to deal with these two tax incentives and get those out the door. And we kind of wanted to see this develop a little bit more before we came forward and came up with a bunch of other tools. But when the developer asked that this be part of their package, we felt obligated to bring it in front of you because it is something, as a body, you have the ability to do.
And I'm working from memory, so I don't have the document in front of me, but I think part of Mr. Sugar's conversation was develop a toolbox, and he didn't elaborate on all the tools in the toolbox as much as he did the RHID and IRB. But I think there was an expectation that we were going to fill that toolbox as time went on.
Any?
Yeah, I have some comment. I wrote mine down because I wanted to make sure my thoughts were coherent on this. Just want to preface my remarks by saying, I like this project, the offering of multiple housing types on property within the city limits adjacent to existing facilities. I like the 36-month anticipated completion window. And I like the group of builders and developers who are sitting out there because I know you have roots to the community, and that in itself is motivation to do a good job. Similarly, Salina City works hard to assure that construction in Salina is safe, sound, secure, and up to code. The city is deserving of the building permit fees. These services are quantifiable in terms of person hours, material, and wages, and should not be given away for free. This commission and city staff recently spent considerable time, money, and effort reviewing and modifying Salina's housing plan and incentives that were felt reasonable for our community. The building and development community was part of the discussion and the process. Waiving building permit fees for an RHID or other project is not part of our current plan. Deviating from the plan before the ink is barely dry should cause concern that the plan will be gutted over a short period of time and no longer serve as a viable guideline for reviewing requests. For most projects, and I would assume for this one as well, the building permit fee represents an amount much less than what the contingency fee probably is for the project. If the building permit fee determines the project's financial viability, that project would appear to be on very shaky financial ground before the shovel meets the dirt. On the issue of setting a precedent, I don't know how the commission is going to fairly decide which future projects are too small to qualify for this assistance. The perception is that the city has raised the flag of desperation in our effort to quickly produce housing for incoming new workers. There's nothing wrong with the idea of incentives, but incentives should not raid the Treasury for creating something that we've done over and over without that incentive. I would hope that if we're going to stretch our actions, it would be in the true infill area of housing development. Most of our incentives give away a portion of future money that we wouldn't be receiving anyway if the project didn't materialize. I'm not hearing a but-for argument in this case. Definitely not one for which I would be comfortable giving away our city services. I believe that this project will or will not proceed irrespective of whether this incentive is granted or not. But I am proposing an alternate action, one that I think is more of a true incentive. If the project is substantially complete in the time frame proposed, then an equivalent amount to the building fees or some other amount determined by the commission could be rebated back to the developers. This is an incentive with two-way benefits. The funds can come from any number of economic development sources. We maintain the integrity and value of the work of our city employees, and it compels the developer to deliver the project on time. I just have a problem. I mean, I could not look a smaller developer with a smaller project in the eye and say, well, no, your houses are not as important as these houses. If we need houses for incoming workers, any builder who can contribute to that should be treated fairly. And without a concrete plan, I just don't like making up the plan. You know, we did this with the incentives for the special assessments. Does the road have a curve? Does it have art? And that's just not the way to do something. You know, if a plan needs to be amended every time we address it, it needs to be scrapped and rebuilt. And this one isn't even off the ground. We're not rebuilding it, but I consider this shooting a tire out rather than building it. You know, so I would truly like to keep it as a true incentive. I'd have no problem, you know, if you can complete this many houses in this short a period of time, we'll find some cash for you. But just the idea that our city workers know that their work is being given away for nothing, I just have a problem with that. And, you know, for child care workers, they have the right to come in and say, well, gosh, you need child care more than you need housing. Waive our fees. That's just going to be a never-ending precedent.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think you hit upon something that I'm concerned with is, you know, we've talked a lot about we really want to promote infill development. And I get that the housing product that you're proposing today, it's not an infill development project. It's a greenfield project. But I feel like at this point, we are awarding so many incentives to greenfield development that I'm really not sure, you know, what additional incentives there are to promote our neighborhood revitalization areas. And because I'm sure that the builders would tell you, you know, is it easier to build a greenfield development, or is it easier to you know, go into an established neighborhood and try to figure out what kind of infill housing product is going to work in that spot? You know, if you get the same incentives either way, I don't know how we're really making our case that we're committed to promoting infill development. And I understand that's not a question either. It was just my own observation. If there are any other commissioners that have questions or would like to speak, we'll conclude up here at the dais, and then I'll open it up for public questions and comments.
I guess my question's for Commissioner Davis, because you're stating that you would be willing to, I'm going to use a word, for lack of better terms, rebate the $104,000, whatever, $676 to the developers down the road if certain, and again, I'm not sure how we do that right now.
Well, I would
because, you know.
change the title of that money or as an economic development tool, reward. I mean, I'm sure we could craft a word, but it would not be, I wouldn't want to necessarily call it rebate of the fees, but it would be, I mean, it's an incentive. I mean, if you they've already placed a value on that service. You know, at this point, we're contributing to construction. It's a one-way incentive, and you know, I'd like to, you know, hold it out as a carrot. I mean, if you can do this in 36 months, then we think that's worthy of an economic development reward.
If it's helpful, we do have similar rebate programs, so from a implementation standpoint, I think that is possible. I don't know, I was looking at the resolution trying to come up with the wording on the fly. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to come up with an amendment for you this evening, but if that's something that you wish to pursue, I think we could postpone this item and we could.
And the wording of it, wouldn't that be a deal breaker? I mean, but it's,
No, I'm not in favor of postponing. The merits of this and the speed with which they're doing it convince me that it's worth the incentives that we're giving. Their incentives are spelled out in the dates and the obligations that the development agreement expresses. So for us to approve waiving some of the fees, that's our discretion on every deal that we make going forward. So the point and the fortunate truth of this is that we've already delayed this a couple months because of inside the house errors. I just really don't think it's fair that we stall it now and when we've all been committed to this road for some time.
is this 104,000 going to stop the shovel from getting to the dirt? I mean,
I just think it complicates the entire development agreement, and these kinds of things we're inexperienced with and want to keep as simple as possible.
which would be my point exactly for us knowing where we're dealing from.
We're dealing from being in, being out on this particular occasion.
Commissioner Ryan mentioned something I hadn't thought of. With these dates and obligations, what happens if the obligations aren't met? I didn't see that really spelled out here. Or
Yes.
if I did, I missed it.
In the development agreement, there's a table right where these dates are, and there's a financial penalty essentially for missing these dates. But then you'll also see there are several clauses in there to relate to extreme situations that can occur, or if the developer needs to come back due to unforeseen circumstances where some of these issues can be addressed. But in general, if the project's not being managed and they slip a date, there's a financial disadvantage of a fee that's associated with that. I think it's at a percentage.
I don't see why we could not, well, we've already, I mean, this one piece I think could be fixed within a week.
I guess I have a question too for the applicant while staff is conferring with Gilmore and Bell. I mean, is this a deal breaker if you don't receive the waiving of the fees? Is the $6.5 million incentive not enough? It needs to be the 6.6 with our building fees. So I guess that's a question I have for the applicant.
And Madam Mayor, there's a monthly reduction for failure to comply is 2.5%.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and Commissioner Davis. I appreciate your thoughtful comments, and I guess on the behalf of the developers, we understand that you all have obligations as a city that you have to meet, and they cost money. Does it make the project not go forward? No. Here's the reality that we're dealing with, however. This was the only tool we even had. I think in a year or 18 months from now, you're going to see that MIH not be 400, it's probably going to be 800, which is where it needs to be, because it's as a cap. You're maybe a chance that you're going to see where sales tax gets waived on materials, or you have an avenue to do that on materials. We do if this was a rental product. We don't have it for a for-sale product. So we looked at all these options and couldn't really find anything. I think I am part of the development team, and there's no doubt about it, but I question often when we talk about this project, man, this is going to be really hard to do because it's just so tight. And I'll tell you what I say to communities across, and I've got to work on a project in a smaller community, and this broker reminds me that I say this a lot because as we go through the process, he sees it. He sees it in how the prices keep creeping up and how it doesn't quite work for the community. There's a reason that this product's not being built in Salina or anywhere else for that matter, and it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so to say, does it not go on? This project goes on, but everything helps, and ultimately it helps the end consumer. And where we started the conversation with your staff back in April was we need to think of a median income in consumer of 53,000 and try to get a product there. Well, we can't quite get there, but we want to try to do everything we can to hit the 53,000 and the new jobs that you're creating. So I'm not saying they're going to walk away, and that, because they're not, but I'm saying if you're looking at it from their ledger, this is not a developer standing in front of you beating the table saying, we want everything possible. We're trying to throw the ingredients and make the outcome best for everybody. This is not the best ask. I will tell you, I ask it in every community. I hope we have some new tools out of the legislature that gives us some better options, but this is the option we had in front of us.
So how does it influence you if that 100,000 is waived in 2021 as opposed to you're getting a check for it in 2024?
Well, we didn't know. And this is one of the things I want to talk to Lauren about multiple times, is we'd rather not be negotiating on the fly. I will tell you, they're nicer than I am. They said it's okay. I don't think I would have, but they said it's okay. So I think they're agreeable to it. To Commissioner Ryan's point, we don't want to wait any longer, but just to be clear, we passed the RHID, so we're in our 30, by the way, we have another 30-day window here to wait, and you'll see that our schedule starts January 1 because, you know, the processes all take a long time. So they're agreeable to that.
Because the one thing that you guys won't have to face, and lucky you, is the next case that uses this as a precedent that we don't necessarily want to go on. And, you know, just know that day is coming.
Yeah, I get it, and I appreciate your comments about your toolkit, but I think your toolkit's going to keep moving. So I think RDG did a great job. We used a lot of their materials in our MIH application, but they will also tell you they are folks that present plans to you. We are folks that are going in front of lenders and saying, hey, here's what we need to do to get this done. And they're similar, but they're not the same. So, well, I have a second, too. I just want to commend your staff. Since April, they've just worked really hard and been on the spot with anything we asked for, and have been flexible and understanding that it's difficult to do. So from Mr. Scragg down onto the rest of the staff, we just really appreciate them as well.
Thank you. That's always really good to hear.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Are there any members of the public that have questions or want to comment on this item, either here today or virtually? All right, hearing none, I'll bring it back. Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't stand up quick enough for you. Chad Farber again from Salina. I know this is just one part of a huger is not a word, is it? A much larger project. But we are finding ourselves, and I've said this to you guys a couple of times already, we're finding ourselves in an emergency situation when it comes to housing now. And when there's an emergency situation, as you guys know, choices are able to be made to help out that situation that we are in. As far as precedent setting, when waiving some of these fees, setting a rebate could be precedent setting as well. I don't know that that's the right way to go. Even some of the guys, I don't know if you heard the comments back here when you asked, would it be okay to receive a check in a few years as opposed to now? I heard one of the comments back there say, it's better than nothing. So they would take it, of course, but I think with this project, we need to move it forward as quickly as possible, as Commissioner Ryan already said. One of the things that I heard from Ms. Driscoll was this was brought before you as a necessary ingredient months ago, and this project was built with that in mind as well. We, the city here, need the development, and the laws of supply and demand force our hand here to give up something that we desperately need. And if we need to give up $104,000 in fees to help out our community and get this thing going and give them a little bit of incentive, if it'll drop that price point just a little bit, I think that would be beneficial for our community as well. The last thing, I do think we also want the right relationship with these developers as well. We want to be able to work with them and communicate with them in the future. We want this to be a pleasant process for them. And from what I'm hearing, they're bending over backwards almost to try to get this accomplished because we, Salina, need this project right now. So I would encourage you to approve this and let's keep this thing going forward. Let's get this momentum, get this ball rolling. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there-
Go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
final call for public comment. I'll bring it back to the commission then.
Yeah, I do agree with Mr. Farber. Whether we do it now or we do it later, we are setting a precedence. And to follow your comments about the infill, I'd be, think we need to have discussions about maybe we do waive some fees or something for infill to help stimulate it also. 104,000 seems like a fairly insignificant amount compared to our annual budget, compared to the dollars that are being invested here by the developer. There are some fairly, when you start looking at the potential penalties for being late, they're going to have to, I think they're somewhat crazy for trying to do this in 36 months, but I think there's significant risk there to them also. So the 104,000, whether it's paid now or later, is not really a deal breaker for me, and I know it's not for them.
Just ask a question. And I get, my problem is with waiving, we are setting a precedent for waiving fees for very well-defined service. I would rather just give them a check for $100,000 economic development than get into waiving fees, unless we're going to go back to the drawing board, have a study session or a meeting where we actually look what's in that toolbox and see what our actions are. I mean, we had a year setting this housing policy, and this, could easily have come up in our discussion sometime in the last 6 months.
I don't necessarily disagree with the concerns that you've had, Commissioner Davis, and to a degree agree with where you're headed with that, but philosophically, I guess, whether it's a rebate program or whether we do this up front, if your concern is that we are giving away services that are easily quantifiable, that our employees are providing for a builder or developer, then a blanket policy of no, we are not going to offer this type of incentive or foregoing those fees, I think is okay. But I'm not in agreement with saying, let's do a rebate. I think that's just, you're agreeing to get rid of the fee, and you're just prolonging it. So I guess, the death by 5,000 paper cuts analogy fits here, and I'm inclined to agree with our other commissioners, and let's get this thing rolling, and let's not put one more hurdle in the way for these guys. Ultimately, this is a really risky time to be doing any of this stuff. There's so much uncertainty out there that as far as setting a precedent, you can look back and say, hey, it was 2021 and we were doing all we could to help developers, and on the other side of that, for those smaller developers or infill developments, adding this and using this as a precedent and saying, yeah, this is something in our toolbox now, is probably something that we can apply to those smaller developments where we don't have as many other incentives to actually offer those people. So I'm inclined to go ahead and vote yes on this and get this rolling.
As long as we have a consistent policy. I don't want to be up here and tell smaller group of developers, well, you weren't going to make as big an impact as this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't have this. And for them, it may actually be more important because every dollar is really going to make a difference for them. So I want to get some consistency out of our future action.
Yeah, the problem is we're in unprecedented times right now. I mean, we have a significant number of individuals that we need moving into the community. We have a housing shortage. Sometimes you can't always set a matrix for everything. I think sometimes and I understand where you're coming from, Commissioner Davis. It's hard to tell one person yes, another person no, but sometimes we're not always looking at like products. I mean, this is a fairly large endeavor over a short period of time. So I guess with that being said, Mayor Hodges, I'd move we approve resolution number 21-7994.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 21-7994. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay. That motion passes 3-2. All right, gentlemen, good luck, and that will take us on to our consent agenda.
Madam Mayor, real quick, is it the direction of the body that you would like staff to look at some type of fee waiver program for your policy, both considering large and small-scale developments for infill and greenfield?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should look at any and
Right. Whatever else is in
in
that
a toolbox.
in
Yeah.
that toolbox needs to have the light of the sun shed upon it, so we,
Needs to be
because
identified.
this is not the place we should be opening up the toolbox.
Right. Do agree with
Understood.
that.
Yeah, completely. That was a very, very well put. And also, if we need to have a different toolbox for infill development that is able to place it to be at least as attractive as going into greenfield development, I think that would be helpful as well, too. I mean, I don't think we have a lot of people taking advantage of our NRA at this point from what you've indicated. so.
And I agree with that, and I'm gonna just throw this out, and it's, we've set aside some dollars from the American Recovery or Rescue Funds, and I think we ought to address some of that. We put $1 million aside for infill, so I think we need to discuss what kind of incentives we can give for infill development, along with, looking at the CHODO and some of those things, so.
And we can review the NRA. As the mayor mentioned, it kind of puts it on equal footing today. It just has not been taken advantage of. But we can recap that with you as well to explain how that works.
Yeah, and I don't, and again, we're getting off topic here a little bit. Maybe this should be under other business, but, when I looked at that NRA map, I was a little bit surprised on the size of it. I mean, to me, there's parts of the community that I know individuals have bought properties, and I said, well, we have this neighborhood revitalization, and then I looked at the map, I said, oops, this property's not in it. And I was taken back a little bit that some of the neighborhoods weren't in it that maybe should be, and I don't know how much staff time or who helps us with that, but I know it's something that when you're just sitting around doing nothing one of these days, we probably ought to.
What I might suggest then, maybe looking at study sessions in December, and we can come back
I
and
think
have a
that'd be great.
discussion about new tools specifically for infill.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Love it. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for
Thank you,
clarifying that,
staff.
Mr. Skull. All right, with that, we will move on to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of October 11, 2021.
Any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion passes 5-0. Item 7.1.
Item 7.1, second reading, ordinance number 21-11079, annexing a 34-acre tract of land on the east side of South Ohio Street between Magnolia Road and Schilling Road into the city limits.
Ordinance number 21-11079 was passed on first reading on October 11th, 2021. Since that time, no comments have been received. Do we have any questions or comments from the commission?
Nope.
No. Any questions or comments from members of the public? All right, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move approval and second reading of ordinance 21-11079.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 21-11079 on second reading. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Peck,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. That motion passes 5-0. Item 7.2.
Item 7.2, second reading, ordinance number 21-11085, changing the zoning district classification of 3 Central Mall outlets located on the north side of Magnolia Road from PDD C1 to PDD C3 to allow construction of a hotel on the property.
Ordinance number 21-11085 was passed on first reading on October 11th. Since that time, the ordinance has been modified to add an additional condition of approval adopted by the City Commission at the October 11th meeting, requiring modifications to be made to the Century Plaza Drive Magnolia Road intersection prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the proposed hotel. Are there any questions or comments from the commission for staff?
Mayor, Commissioners, I was going to call the commission's attention to the second page of the ordinance. It's under Section 3, Additional Conditions, 3E, so you could see the actual language that had been incorporated into that ordinance. We wanted to also, what that does is it puts the responsibility on the mall owner, which is also the owner of the hotel site, to make the modifications necessary to have, as our interpretation, to have designated turn lanes for exiting vehicles. Wanted to clarify, after some additional research that staff performed, that's kind of a shared entrance for the majority of the roadways actually owned by the owners of the Panera Chipotle site. And there are easements across it for the convenience store and for the mall. But staff looked at it this morning at a meeting. It appeared that most of the improvements that we were looking at in terms of widening the road to the east falls on the mall property, so we would be working with them, but we wanted to share with you that it's actually, in terms of ownership, a shared opening that's not solely for the central mall. So I wanted to let commissioners read Condition E, the language, and see if that captured successfully what the concern of the commission was trying to address.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. I appreciate you pointing that out. Are there any questions for Mr. Andrew? Thank you.
The other thing I would note, I'd let the city manager elaborate, but one of the things that staff discussed this morning was some follow-up action in terms of additional study or examination of that intersection beyond just what's discussed here, and I'll let him share that with you.
And this focus, as the language describes, is turn lanes, kind of that southbound movement, turning left. But staff's talked about looking at traffic accident history, turn movements, roadway improvements, stacking of left-bound or left turn movements westbound on Magnolia, which is outside the scope of what this direction was, outside the scope of this project. But in response to the concern that was raised, we're going to take a deeper dive.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And on behalf of all the people that I have goosed out into that intersection, thank you from them as well.
Can I ask a question?
Would this cover us if staff came back and said, instead of widening that exit, it should be made a right turn only out of there?
I think the second part that I described is probably going to be directed more at the configuration out in Magnolia and some of those items. This is directed at a dedicated left turn if you're southbound coming on Century Plaza Drive.
I was going to ask a related question. Could, if the solution to this was that a sign went up that says, if you want to go eastbound on Magnolia, go to the next street or whatever roadway, that would still fall under the scope of the broad direction in this ordinance?
We can certainly have that conversation with the hotel. This language is directed at that left turn lane. But one of the things we looked at, and part of the conversation we had was right turn only on Magnolia. Another possibility is right turn only on Century Plaza Drive, which would have the net effect of causing you to have to circle around to the entrance near Chapel Ridge. But there's a lot of traffic design that I think we need to take on as the city to answer some of those questions. We're trying to direct the condition of this approval on that left turn lane, and then we'll have to collaborate with the mall owners and the hotel owner.
I think it does establish a certain expectation that both the mall and the hotelier be partners with us in solving this problem, and that it does give us at least a little bit of leverage toward bringing them to the table to help figure out a solution for the traffic issues at that intersection.
Yeah, I think the left turn lane itself will be a noticeable improvement. And then as you look at the broader turning movements, it's well beyond the hotel project.
Right.
more the road system and how it's been laid out for years now.
Any other questions for staff? Any questions or comments from members of the public? I don't see anyone with their hand raised. I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, move approval of ordinance number 21-11085 on second reading.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 21-11085 on second reading. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick,
Aye.
Commissioner Peck,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hodges.
Aye. That motion passes 5-0. Item 8.1.
Item 8.1, consider resolution number 21-7993, authorizing the city manager to permit the Salina VFW post number 1432 auxiliary volunteers to solicit within the city's rights-of-way.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is, the original precedent for this occurred in 2014 when there was a study session with city commissioners about solicitation in the city's right-of-way, and the initiative for that was something that was initiated by the fire department and off-duty firefighters to do a Fill the Boot fundraising event. A very similar event to that has taken place the last 2 years, sponsored by the Salina VFW Post 1432, and they have, on the weekend before Veterans Day, which they consider to be Veterans Day, their Veterans Day Poppy Drive, they have solicited donations at the Broadway and Crawford intersection the last 2 years. They have submitted a similar request this year and have added the Crawford and Ohio intersection as a newly added request for this year. We've summarized the basic standard traffic ordinance prohibitions, and the solicitation within the right-of-way and within the public traveled way is prohibited unless the person or organization has first obtained a permit authorizing such soliciting from the city. And so the Veterans Salina VFW Post group has submitted a special event permit application. With that, they've submitted a traffic safety plan and a certificate of liability insurance that names the city as an additional insured. And so this is a repeat event from the prior 2 years, but it now has been expanded, or at least requested to be expanded, to Crawford and Ohio. So your alternatives this evening would be to approve the attached resolution that would authorize the city manager to issue a special event permit to Salina VFW to solicit within the right-of-way at those 2 locations on Saturday, November 6th. You could approve that resolution with amendments that you think are appropriate. You could postpone consideration of this request to allow VFW or staff to provide you with additional information, or you could vote to deny the resolution. If this option is chosen, then they would not be allowed to solicit within the city's right-of-way on November 6th.
Thank you very much. Any questions for staff? Thank you, Mr. Andrew.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from members of the public? All right, bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action.
Mayor, I move we approve resolution number 21-7993.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 21-7993. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes 5-0, which takes us to item 8.2.
Item 8.2, authorize city staff preparation of a special assessment engineering feasibility report for Phase 2 of Magnolia Hills Estates, Edition Number 2.
Mayor Hodges, I will be recusing myself from this item.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hoppick.
Good evening again, Mayor and Commissioners. This is an application and request, which we would consider step one of the request for the utilization of special assessments for the second phase of Magnolia Hills Estates Number 2. We've provided some of the background in there that the property owned by Magnolia Hills Incorporated extends all the way to Holmes Road, but because of complications associated with financing improvements to Holmes Road, they submitted a scaled-back plat that had 19.4 acres and contained 45 lots. There were 29 lots in Phase 1 and 16 lots in Phase 2. And the City Commission approved a request for the use of special assessment financing for Phase 1 in October of 2018, and then in November, there was an authorization to approve, prepare a special assessment feasibility report. And so that was done in 2019. The improvements have all been installed, and that is filling up with newly constructed homes. And so there has been a request to move forward with Phase 2. Mr. Kelly Dunn has filed the application and petition requesting your authorization to have the engineering staff prepare a preliminary engineer's estimate and feasibility report to serve the 16 lots in Phase 2. In their application, the applicant indicates that Phase 1 is filling up and they want to have Phase 2 shovel-ready to continue to provide housing for new jobs in the community. Again, this is a smaller area. It's building on Phase 1. There's 16 lots in Phase 2. We provided the information about the life cycle cost and the annual maintenance for utilities. One of the things that was done in the interim is that there is a separate benefit district that the City Commission approved, which would authorize future improvements to Markley Road, and that those future improvements would be triggered by a threshold of 6,500 vehicles per day traffic on Magnolia Road. So the benefit district has been created, and this portion of Magnolia Hills Number 2 would be part of that benefit district, but no improvements would occur unless traffic on Markley Road exceeded 6,500 vehicles per day. We've indicated the price points in this would be in the 195,000 to 295,000 range, and the projected lot prices are the same or similar to Phase 1, which is 25,000 to 35,000 per lot. We determined that in the most recent MLS data, there are currently 12 existing homes in that price range that are currently on the market in Salina. We also looked at the inventory of vacant lots that are served by public infrastructure, and we determined that there's currently 60 vacant buildable lots available that have public infrastructure. The majority of those lots are in Stone Lake Phase 3A. Phase 1 of this subdivision and River Trail Addition Number 2, which are in the same price range, are nearing full build-out. As far as the projected rate of which houses would be purchased, we'd have to defer that to comments from the developer about how quickly the 29 lots in Phase 1 have been purchased and built on, but you can see that the benefit district was authorized in November 2019, and it's the 29 lots are nearly built out at this point. These are all single-family homes. There's not any innovative housing products being proposed. The assessments we estimate to be in the $33,000 to $34,000 price range, and that's pretty consistent with what has been a recent experience with special assessments that we've summarized on page 9 of your report. And so we did point out that potentially there would be an additional special assessment burden on these lots, and that would be if there was a benefit district created for Markley Road. We estimate that each lot in Magnolia Hills Estates Number 2 would be subject to a $2,800 assessment based on the 75-25 cost share in that benefit district. We haven't identified any physical barriers or topographical barriers that would prevent homes from being built on any of these 16 lots. This subdivision does have connectivity back to Markley Road and would have future connectivity to Wheatland Valley to the north. As you're aware, Markley Road is a rural design today, but there is improvements being made in terms of a 8-foot hike-bike path along the east side of Markley Road that's under construction right now. And so the Live Salina plan indicates that there's a need for 129 additional housing units in this price range by 2025. Your options this afternoon would be to authorize staff to prepare an engineering feasibility report and resolution of advisability for Phase 2 of this subdivision for your future consideration. You could postpone consideration of this item and provide staff with additional direction, or you could vote to instruct staff not to proceed with preparation of an engineering feasibility report for Phase 2 at this time. This is a discretionary action on your part, and I do believe we have Mr. Byquist here representing Magnolia Hills, Inc., but I would stand for any questions you have about staff's report.
Any questions for Mr. Andrew?
Nope.
I think the only question that I had, and I know we've talked about it in the past, is as you look at the costs for keeping up the streets in this subdivision over the 30-year period that's under discussion, what are going to be the corresponding income generators in terms of property tax? And I think that that's something that I think spoke to something Commissioner Davis had mentioned earlier, and I don't know if it would be possible to establish a rubric of assuming, say, like 25% occupancy 0 to 5 years, 50% occupancy 5 to 10, and 25% like 10 to 20. I'm just throwing these out, but it would be really helpful so that we know what we're comparing, how much property tax we're expecting these homes to generate to offset the cost of their maintenance. And I would look at staff to figure out a way to at least have some sort of a rubric to so that we can have that analysis, obviously not for the one that's under consideration right now, but in the future. Because you guys have done a great job lining out all the costs for us over the next 30 years. And I know that those costs are there regardless of whether houses are built on those lots or not. But it would be helpful to at least be able to kind of balance that with expectations of what we would expect to see from, as far as property tax revenue goes.
I know I attempted that on Stone Lake and came up with a formula for doing that, but unfortunately my formula assumed that all the revenue was going to be generated when we first started building houses instead of looking at it in some phased fashion. So we'd have to have some, I guess we'd have to look at our experiences of how quickly these are building out when they started. I do know that, for instance, in Phase 3A of Stone Lake, I've already reviewed 14 building permits for Phase 1 out of the 47 lots that are available. So that, then as mentioned, there's usually a time lag before you've got partial construction, then you've got full construction, and even when you have a full construction, there's generally, you're rolling into the next tax year before it fully shows up on the tax rolls. So I guess.
I mean, I understand no formula would be perfect, but if we had a certain assumption that we could apply to developments in terms of property tax income generated. It would be a helpful number just to compare that with our investment in it.
I think we
And-
could come up with like 25%.
Yeah,
Years 1 through
Yeah.
such, 50% year,
Right.
by this year, 75%.
Yeah.
I think we can attempt to do that and run it by you. I can say that we have another request in, and you annex the property tonight, which is there on the east side of South Ohio. We're kind of struggling with that one because it doesn't, these that have all single-family homes, we have a pretty good experience with tax revenue, with what we're going to get in terms of water billing and things like that. In that subdivision, it's an assisted living facility, and it's multifamily apartments, and it's townhomes. So doing those kind of projections for those, in terms of timing and in terms of revenue projections, I think is a little more challenging, but I think we can do better with these that are all single-family homes.
well, thank you very much.
I do have one quick question, Mr. Andrew, might be a question for you to answer. In leaving the discretion for asphalt or concrete paving up to the developer, is there ever a point, and our sidewalk discussion has me thinking about this a little bit, but is there ever a point when, I know in the past, there's been times where concrete has been actually more cost-effective than asphalt at times. That's not the case right now, I'm sure. But is there ever a tipping point where the city says they're close enough that it actually behooves the city to help out with the cost differential?
Yeah, in addition to just the straight-up cost comparison, we can look at the life cycle cost, and concrete has a better life cycle, so that is something that we take into account. And if if the bids are close and life cycle costs start to look like they're appealing, then we could certainly take that up. As part of our bidding, we take that into account.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a difference when, in some cases, the city is putting the project out for bids and we're reviewing the bids. In the other cases, which I imagine was done in phase 1, there's a development agreement and the developer's actually making those choices. So we do have more discretion when the city's actually putting it out for bid.
Well, that's and my question is directed more towards when the developer is,
I'm going to let Mr. Byquist address that as to when he would choose asphalt or concrete.
it's not, I don't even want his perspective. I want,
I think your question is, can we stay in communication, and if it's close enough that the value's there, could we offer
does it
that?
behoove us from a future standpoint to say, you know what, we'd rather kick in X number of dollars and have this as concrete for future maintenance from the city of Salina?
The numbers would have to break right, but that is a possibility, and that's just a conversation we need to be mindful
At
of.
one point, 10 years ago, I remember Mr. Stack, I think, it seemed like the average life cycle on asphalt was like 7 years versus 30 years for concrete. And those numbers could be totally off, and it obviously depends on what kind of traffic flow they have as well. But it just seems to me that offering that sort of, looking at incentives and stuff, hey, if we can put $10,000 here up front and save us X number of dollars down the road, it might be something to at least think about going forwards, I guess all I'm saying, so.
We'll see what we can do in the way of communication with the developer as they put it out to bid.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It might be worth a small investment on our part to recoup longer savings. The applicant's here. I'd like to invite you to speak if you're so inclined, Mr. Byquist.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. I'm Stan Byquist, 2601 South Ohio. Obviously, I'm here and hoping you will approve this request, but I'll give you a little bit of history on the last phase, which is 29 lots. We have sold and are building on 21. We have 8 left. And so we need lots because it will take us, 9 months probably to get the street and the infrastructure in for this next phase. With that, I would probably, although you didn't want to hear, I will,
I'll take your insight.
I will probably put my 2 cents in on the concrete asphalt, because we do bid our jobs privately. We found it to our advantage, I think, and to the homeowner's advantage. Magnolia Hills, which is currently 100-plus taxable residents there, we put in all concrete at our discretion. Our feeling is, and it does cost a little more money sometimes. In the past few years, it's been fairly even. Any help would be appreciated, but we know from history that the concrete, as mentioned by the city, has a longer life cycle. We also feel, and this is feedback from residents, is that they feel their neighborhood is a little more better. That's coming from residents. So take it for what it's worth. So with that, if you have any more questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Any further questions for Mr. Byquist? Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Appreciate
hearing me.
Being here today. Any questions or comments from members of the public? And I don't think I see anyone online with their hand raised, so I will bring it back to the commission for further discussion or action.
Mayor, I move we authorize staff to prepare an engineering feasibility report and resolution of advisability for Phase 2 of Magnolia Hills Estate Edition Number 2 for future consideration by the City Commission.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to authorize city staff to prepare a special assessment engineering feasibility report for Phase 2 of Magnolia Hills Estates Edition Number 2. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion passes 4-0. And if we could call Commissioner Hoppick back to the room. There he is.
Got him.
His ears must have been burning. He's
Or he
back
just
with us.
assumed that we had no other business and already split.
All right. That brings us to other business. And are there any other items that commissioners would like to bring up under other business today? All right. With hearing none, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you here next week.